Hello and welcome to Behind the Lines. I'm Diane Dayton. Today we're going to talk about the weather, and we're even going to get a peek at Antarctica. And with us today, of course, we have a meteorologist.
You caught me.
Yeah, I did. We have Drew Anderson. Now, some people may remember you from Channel 8, from Channel 43, because you've been around in the area for about a decade. You are a meteorologist.
I am.
You also are a professor at Westchester.
It's great. I get to teach meteorology too. Now, I feel we do a little of that on television, talking about lows, and hey, we got some rain there. But it's so great to not only just talk with students, but I feel like I'm making a difference, because sometimes when you're just talking to the camera, it's tough to get that connection with the viewer. But it certainly helps now with social media, because you can get that instant feedback. People can ask questions. So it's just great, though, to have both sides now, because when I first started in TV, even though I've only been doing this 10 years, social media really didn't exist for TV stations.
Right. It's a whole different creature now, isn't it?
It sure is.
Yeah.
But it's fun. It gives you a lot more opportunities.
Right. So I want to know how you got involved with doing the weather and what led you to be a meteorologist.
So here's what's interesting. I went to Penn State, and a lot of the people that I went to school with, they have these stories when they were around third grade or so 9 or 10. They get interested in some sort of weather event. A tornado came by their house, a big blizzard. They remember walking in this big blizzard. I'm not as cool. So my story is this. So I grew up in the Philly area, and I guess as a kid I was just fascinated by television, because my mom, I remember one time, took me to meet one of the weather personalities when they did a live weather somewhere. And we just, even though I was 9 or 10, I got a friendship with this meteorologist down in Philly, and he became a family friend. So I got to know him, and that was just kind of in the back of my head. And then college time came, and I thought, I got to do something. I got to pick something here. And that's just what was in my head, and there it was. It was meant to be.
It was meant to be, wasn't it? What do you enjoy most about being a meteorologist?
So for me, it's the communication aspect.
Okay.
Because when I came out of school, so school, they pound you with a theory. It's all about, you got to say the educated words, so to say. And so when I first started at Channel 8, that's what I really tried to do. And the team there is more technical. And what I learned over the last 10 years, and particularly with some of the work I have been doing teaching students, is the less science I can use, the better. Now, I'm not watering down the content, it's just a different approach of how I explain the science. Why say, hey, there's a big area of low pressure bringing rain, when I can say, hey, you see all that rain out there? It's coming our way. Because what I learned from students, first of all, I know when they start falling asleep when I start dropping these science terms, but I just learned that it's a lot easier to follow your message, what you're trying to share, which ultimately is, what's the weather the next few days? When you can just remove any barrier, and that barrier would be some scientific words. So for me, it's really been interesting learning that, because that was a long journey. When I first started, I would use lows, highs, all these technical terms. Now I'm at a point where I won't. And it took time, and also it took a little bit of, okay, I'm going to do this because I want to drop those science terms.
Yeah. Well, you know what else I think is interesting? We all want to know about the weather.
Right.
So you always have pretty much a captive audience when you are doing the weather, because we really do want to know that information.
And that's so important to me. I always like to explain when I do the weather, why are we having the weather we're having? Why is it so windy today?
Right.
Why do we have rain all day long? To me, I'm just interested in that. And so I want to share that, because I feel if I'm interested in it, you'll be interested with it too.
Well, here's what I'm interested in as well. What precipitated
Look
your
at you, very
trip,
funny, very funny.
your trip to Antarctica.
Isn't that cool?
That's very cool.
Lifelong dream, first of all. We're talking bucket list sort of stuff. I've always been interested in Antarctica. Now, how this all got started was this. I've been fortunate enough to travel over the years, and it would be my last continent. And who gets to say they've been to all the continents? So I'm like, how can I find someone to pay for me to go? Because it costs a lot of money. It's usually about $10,000 just for the cruise to Antarctica. I don't have that kind of money sitting around. Everyone thinks you make a lot of money in television. You do okay, but by no means are you making big bucks unless you're in New York or LA or something like that.
Right.
So I looked for opportunities of how I could get to Antarctica. And one way is through the National Science Foundation. They'll take a media person a year. So of course I applied for this. This is about 5 years ago. National News beat me out, as they should, because it's a wider audience. Ultimately, their goal with this program is, hey, communicate what's going on down in Antarctica with the world. Let them know what kind of science is happening here. And that's what really interested me too, was the science happening down there. There is such groundbreaking research of things you just wouldn't believe. For example, in the ocean, there are some things kind of like sponges, almost like the sponges we use for a sink, but actually the organism itself, that they're finding out that this relatively new species can help cure some certain diseases or help with some certain ailments. And there's so little research in that region because Antarctica is huge. It's a gigantic continent, and there's so much real estate, and only so little of it is looked out. So as a science guy, I just love learning. And I've just been fascinated by what's happening there, and I wanted to communicate that with others. But taking a pause, so how did I get down there? So once, I was getting beat out by national news, I thought, okay, what's another way I can get down there? Well, I thought, you know what? A lot of these folks that go down there are really interested in science too. Sure, they're going for vacation, but they're curious about what's happening there. And I thought, oh yeah, cruise ship lecturer. So they have cruise ship lecturers because you got a couple days at sea to get you down there, and what are you going to do on the boat for a couple days when you're stuck at sea? And these aren't the boats when you go to the Caribbean that have all the casinos and the pools. No. This is just a regular boat with a room. So they bring in folks like me that have backgrounds in certain science fields, or maybe just photography, to pretty much share their wisdom and knowledge with the passengers so everyone learns from each other. And that's the opportunity that I got. Awesome.
That had to have been pretty cool.
It was exciting and scary because even though I teach in different things, that was my first time on a cruise ship.
Okay.
So I was like, okay, I'm going to be able to handle this. Am I going to get seasick? Because the passage from South America to Antarctica is known to be some of the bumpiest travel in the world. We're talking high seas. I got lucky. It was smooth as ice when we were going down there. Coming back, a different story. It fought back coming back.
How long did it take you to get there?
Okay, so you leave from southern Argentina. It takes about 2.5 days. So you leave at night once you get on the boat, and then 2 days later, you're at the very tip of Antarctica.
Okay. Now, you were talking about how big Antarctica is.
Unbelievably big.
Give us a frame of reference that we can comprehend how big it is.
Okay, so really it encompasses the world. When you look at a map and look at the bottom, it kind of looks small because it's stretched across, but it's this big, gigantic area. Think of the North Pole, right? North Pole is right at the top of Earth, and then there's the Arctic Circle. There's a big area around it. It's pretty much taken up the whole Arctic Circle area, but in the southern hemisphere, it is some big-time real estate. Now, there's not a whole lot of talk because you're not going to be developing things there.
Right.
It's mainly all ice, except for around the coast. Around the coast now, you're seeing a lot of the ice melt, and you're actually seeing what's underneath, these rocks that have been all ground up from this heavy ice just kind of plowing it. Now, the rest of it is very mountainous. It's actually surprising how mountainous it is. I went down there. I'm thinking, okay, this is going to look like Rocky Mountain National Park. It's going to look the same everywhere. It's just going to be snow-capped mountains. It really surprised me how diverse the landscape was.
Oh, really?
Because the cruise ship takes you to different little islands, because there's a bunch of little islands with it, for the little tip that sticks up toward South America, because it's more accessible, it doesn't take as long to get to, and more importantly, not quite as cold.
Okay.
When you think Antarctica, right, I think it's super cold.
We do.
Yeah, that's in the center of Antarctica. The part that actually sticks up, it's surrounded by ocean water. And ocean water down there, it's got some ice cubes in it, it's got some icebergs. So it's about freezing. It's about 32, 33 degrees. And what happens is when you're by the ocean, that really has an effect on your temperature by the coast. It's part of the reason year-round the air temperature in San Fran, about 60s or 70s. The ocean water is actually not the warmest out if you've ever gone swimming in San Francisco, because the ocean water affects the temperature by the coast. So since this little tip of Antarctica is surrounded by water and it's narrow, right around the coast, temperatures around freezing. So when I went down there, it was 32 all day, 32 degrees.
Wow.
I had on my parkas. I'm ready to go for negative 60, negative 40. But no, during their summer, and it would go in December because that's their summer, seasons are opposites on different sides of the earth.
Right.
And temperatures are usually pretty moderate. And I said, okay, I talked to a research base. How cold do you get in your winter? They said, oh, only about 10 to 15 degrees colder. The thing is, again, as soon as you get away from the water, oh, it's much, much colder. You get inland, that's where your negative 40s, negative 60s are year-round.
Wow. What surprised you the most about being there?
Really, it was just how different everything looked. Right? We were talking about how I expected mountains. Yeah, there were some mountains, but every time we went to a new place, it could not look more different. There was this volcanic area where it had these different rocks that looked like, if you've ever been to Hawaii, lava rocks, actually. Now, Antarctica, surprisingly, is an active volcano. Hard to think of ice
Right.
and also volcano at the same time. Reminds me of the Lidditz Fire and Ice Festival, right? Right? You got the two together, that dichotomy. But there's actually an active volcano there that will smoke from time to time by one of the research bases. I wasn't by that research base. That one's called McMurdo Sound, where a lot of scientists from around the United States universities go to.
Right.
But because of one of these places, the ground was a little warm, so there wasn't snow on it, so I got to see these volcanic rocks, and the cruise ship kind of took us around. At other places, you see these big cobbles and pebbles, and you're walking on it, and I'm thinking, it's weird to be walking not on snow in Antarctica. Now, the rest of the spots we went to, sure, plenty of snow covered, plenty of wildlife like penguins,
Right.
seals, and not to mention all the birds and even some whales we saw on the way down.
That's great. Well, you did a piece that really explains a lot of different things while you were there. And it's about a 5-minute piece, but let's let everybody else look at that, and then we're going to talk to them when we come back. Check this out when Drew was in Antarctica.
Now that's a welcome to Antarctica. Take a look at the ice just over my shoulder right here. You can really see different layers in the ice right there. In each layer, that's a different snowfall. And as fresh snow falls, well, that older snow, it gets squeezed and compressed in the ice. And what's interesting right here in Antarctica is that snow, it's not going anywhere. All of that history gets trapped right there in the ice. And that is what scientists study.
Right here, he's actually using a hand lens, and with that you can see these bubbles. Inside the bubbles are samples of ancient air.
Ellen and her husband Lonnie are distinguished professors. They study air that gets trapped in the snow.
This air could be, several thousand years old, which is really all you need if you want to just look at greenhouse gases we're concerned with right now with global climate change, like methane and carbon dioxide.
Ellen says those greenhouse gases in our air have never been this high. Those greenhouse gases, they help the planet warm up. And that warm up is really noticeable here in Antarctica. How have you personally seen a change?
It's pretty dramatic, actually. There are some beaches that now I can walk, cobble, pebble beaches that were at one point covered by glaciers.
We made it all the way down to the Washington, D.C. area, and here we are outside of Ron Naveen's house. He goes down to Antarctica every year to literally hand count penguins. Hey, Ron!
Hey, Drew, how's it going?
So good to see you.
How are you? Welcome to Penguin Land.
It is good to be here. A little farther north, though, than Antarctica.
We started years ago counting penguins at the various places where all the tourists were going, wanting to know if potentially the numbers were changing because of the number of visits. And we haven't found that that's happening. But now, because the Antarctic Peninsula, where I work, is warming faster than anywhere else on the planet except the Arctic, the penguin populations are changing. The climate is changing.
These Gentoo penguins have handled change pretty well. As their food moves more south to find colder water, the Gentoos move with it. In the last decade, this research base in the south went from having just a few Gentoos to nearly 1,000.
And the exciting part of this is trying to understand better why one species is adapting and the other two are not. The other two penguins in our area, the Adelie penguins and chinstrap penguins, aren't doing so well. It potentially is a food issue.
Okay, so take a look right here. It's a bit pink on top of the snow. Yeah, that's penguin poo right there. But pink penguin poo means they're healthy, because it means they're eating their preference for food, krill, which is a lot like shrimp. If the mound looks more white, that means they're eating fish.
The Gentoos have much more readily switched over to eating fish. They all can switch over, but the Gentoos, which are the largest of the three species, can dive deeper and don't need to go as far offshore as the other two tend to go. So they're kind of built for adapting better to the warming climate than the warmed climate than the other two have.
For my time here in Antarctica, along the coast, temperatures have been right around 32. That's actually not too bad. That's the kind of weather we have back at home. Now, it is summer here, so during the winter, it does get a bit colder, at least along the coast where I'm at. About 10 to 15 degrees colder during the day. But that's not too bad. You'd expect Antarctica to be much colder.
It's really crazy now. One year you could have heavy snowfall, the next year heavy rainfall. the weather changes are much more dramatic. There's much more moisture in the air than before, and it just kind of depends how it comes out of the wash, as snow or rain. There was such intense snow this last year that we only counted one chick for the breeding year, so a dramatic breeding failure at this one colony. So the changes are wilder and wilder, and they're not hard to discern, and they're pretty striking.
So you would say that the penguins really respond, in particular, to the weather?
No question. I look at penguins, I think about climate change, and I think about issues that we're going to face in the future when the warming comes our way. Sure, the facts and the data and the statistics are awful about what might happen, but my view is if people can kind of lead their lives the way I grew up in Pennsylvania, getting out in the woods, breathing the fresh air, watching birds, learning how birds live, it translates into a better understanding of how we fit into life on the planet.
With a story from Antarctica, with the penguins in the background, I'm Meteorologist Drew Anderson.
And we're back behind the lines talking about weather, Antarctica, with Drew Anderson. We just watched this wonderful clip that you put together, and we're seeing what's going on there and what's happening with the penguins and some of the weather changes.
It's really interesting. So Antarctica, along with the Arctic, so up, say, northern Alaska, those two are the fastest warming spots on the planet. They're warming about 3 times faster than anywhere else. And so our one expert we talked to, who's from Pennsylvania, Ron Naveen,
right.
So he goes down, hard to believe, he goes down and counts penguins every single year in Antarctica.
Wow.
Think about that job. And he told me, hey, I got into that because growing up in Pennsylvania, I just loved watching birds. And he just naturally went into that. And his big thing is this: hey, it's warming up so much down there. How is that affecting penguins? Because I'm curious, he's curious, what's going to happen when that big warming comes up this way, when it's more noticeable? Because, yeah, we hear a lot about, oh, yeah, the planet's warming up, the planet's warming up. I don't see it in my backyard. Certainly
Right.
some of our last few winters, there hasn't been a whole lot of snow, and it's been much warmer than it should be, but let's face it, we're not complaining
Right.
here in Lancaster County. You know, right? I'm going to go down to Antarctica if I want it cold, clearly.
Right.
So what's interesting is, though, that warming is having such a big effect on the whole entire area. We were just talking about penguins, but it's much more than penguins. Ron was telling me that he just can't get over how different things are. He remembers when he first went down there, you wouldn't see rocks on any beach. It was snow and ice right up to the line. And now you're seeing that kind of the retreat of the snow, and you're seeing more of the pebbles and seeing beach. Then he just was telling me he could not get over how just different the weather is. One year, it'll be a giant snowstorm, which is typical. You would expect. It is Antarctica.
Sure.
And then the other year, he'll say it'll be raining. And penguins are not designed to handle the rain. They're designed to handle snow. See, when it rains, it's actually really sad. Their fur gets all wet, which, no one likes to be wet, right? We wear a raincoat. But it's sad because they'll die. And it's particularly bad for young chicks. And the reason is they can't get warm. Their fur stays wet and they get hypothermia. Their fur is designed to get snowflakes that just kind of go right off.
Right.
But when it gets that rain, and heavy rain, and that's the kind of weather they're getting on that coastal part of Antarctica, it just soaks their fur, and you see colonies going down and down. Now, there's 3 different types of penguins, as we talked about. You can see them waddling along.
Right.
So you have the one type of penguin that's doing pretty well. They've adapted really well to this big noticeable change and warming that's down there. Those right there are the Gen 2 penguins. So much fun to say. I got to tell you, I'm a little partial on penguins.
Yeah, you are.
I grew up, and I told you
Yes.
this before we started, I grew up, my stuffed animal, I'll admit this, my stuffed animal growing up was a penguin.
Of
and
course.
I think that's how the seed got planted for why I always had Antarctica in the back of my head.
Yes.
And I love for these birds. They're just so neat. They literally look like they're in a tuxedo walking around.
They do, don't they?
They're so cute.
Yeah.
The other 2 species, the Adelie, and another species that's had some problems over the years itself, is because they haven't adapted as well. So, first of all, those particular species, they're getting hurt because, for one, their young chicks are dying when they're getting these rain events.
Okay.
So that's a problem. Secondly, they're starving. And it's almost tough to say that. It's hard to believe because they have different food options, but here's what's going on. These penguins, as we were talking about, they love eating pretty much shrimp. It's called krill down there, but it's very similar to shrimp, and that's what they like to eat. And as crude as this might sound, scientists study the penguin poo. We'll call it
Okay.
guano just to
Okay.
keep it up there.
All right.
But so the penguin guano, it will be pink when they're eating the food they like to eat because krill is pink like shrimp.
Okay.
And what these scientists are finding in these different colonies, like the Adelie penguins, their excrements are not pink, they're white or green. White tells you they're eating a lot of fish. Now, all these penguins can eat fish, but the Adelies don't really so much. The dent chews are those different types of penguins. If it's green, that means they're starving because you're seeing their stomach acid.
Oh.
And so the scientists are recording this so that they can better understand the changes in these species, because for that two types of penguin species, their numbers have dwindled down astonishingly, whereas the other one is okay with not only following its food source, but also eating different things like fish. The whole reason those shrimp are leaving and moving is the ocean water's warming up. As our air warms up, well, the ocean's going to warm with it. But it's gradual. It's like if you ever made pasta, right? Think how long it takes when you're just hungry and you want to boil that pasta water, and you watch it, right? You watch it, it never
Sure.
boils. It takes, what, about 20 minutes for a pot? It takes a long time to warm water up. So as this water warms gradually, these shrimp-like creatures, they don't like it. They want to follow the cold water, so they're moving more south. These penguins are resistant to moving their home. Birds are very
Okay.
used
Yes.
to roosting at the same spot,
right.
having their breeds. So the one species, they're more adaptable to actually moving where they live. The other two, not so much. So they're just used to set in their ways, really, and their food's leaving, so they're getting starving from that standpoint. For reasons scientists aren't quite sure yet, they're less adaptive to eating fish, even though they can all eat fish. So it's just interesting, and that's what scientists like Ron are trying to figure out.
Okay.
Why is one species adapting well to the impacts of all this warming, while the other two not so
Or
much?
not. How is this affecting the seals?
So the seals themselves are, first of all, mainly fish eaters. But here's the thing. Fish also like cold water. The fish food like plankton. You're going to find that where the water is much colder. We hear a lot about El Nino when it comes to winter forecasting, and that
Sure.
just has to do with the water temperature, because the Peruvian fishermen, so literally fishermen off the coast of Peru where this El Nino comes from that affects our weather, what's interesting is their ocean water will be warmer than usual. And they notice when this happens, oh, the fishing's bad. Because the ocean water they like is cold because that's where their food is. If you have a warm ocean water, the food's not there. So the same sort of thing's happening in Antarctica as well. The ocean water is warmer than it usually is. So that means the seals themselves have to kind of do the same thing as the penguins. They have to travel with it. Or what they have been finding is some of the numbers have been going down on the
Okay.
seals, just like with the penguins. And I have to tell you, just being there and seeing some of the seals, to see a seal up close,
Yeah.
oh my goodness. They're lazy guys, I'm not going to lie. The penguins are kind of curious. They'll come up and see you and visit you and
Right.
kind of see what you're about when you stand there. The seals, they can't be bothered. They're just lying there the whole time. But they're having some of the same problems as these species, and it's food related, just because of the warm up, and they're less resistant to understanding that we got to do things differently to survive.
What can we do?
So for us as a human species, it kind of goes back to what Ron's doing. I think the best thing and the most important thing we could do is just knowledge, just better understanding what's going on around the world. I'll be the first to admit, I live in a bubble. I just care about my backyard. But I think it's really helpful to know what's going on around the world. A lot of folks up in Alaska, they know all about this warmer weather firsthand because their power poles are going like this. They're usually anchored in soil that's frozen year-round, and as that's melting because it's warming up so much, well, what's happening is their infrastructure is crumbling, not only the power lines, but their roads, too. So for someone up in Alaska, and I had the opportunity to visit some of these small towns, one of the mayors said, hey, our annual budget's just going to mitigate the effects of all this warming, and that's just our budget. We still got to run a town.
Right.
So the best thing we can do is just understand what's happening around the world. And the biggest problem is things warm up. And I want to add that it is natural for the planet to warm up. We go in cold phases. We had the Ice Age. We're going to have warm phases. That's natural. But the big talk you hear about is just how quickly it's warming up. That's what alarms scientists. And then the scientists are attributing just some of the air pollution. And here's an interesting stat that I think about. When you release carbon dioxide, so it comes from pollution of factories and all different places. Well, what's interesting is about 20 to 40% of that pollution is released, it's staying in the air for thousands of years. And here's why that's a problem. these greenhouse gases, that's what it's called. All it just means is this. When you put some of this stuff in the air, it warms up the air. We like that. We want the air to be warm. You know, if we didn't have water vapor, which is the gas form of water, if we didn't feel like the humidity on a warm day, it'd be 60 degrees colder outside pretty much every day. So we want some warmer weather out there, and we want some of these greenhouse gases to warm it up. But like with me eating Halloween candy, you can have too much of a good thing, believe me. So that's the main problem why you hear about this sort of pollution and these greenhouse gases is because a percentage of that's not going anywhere. And the more you put in the air, the warmer the air gets. So understanding not only that, but also the connection to the actual effects on penguins and just places around the world, because it's easy to think there's not issues going on if you're not seeing it. But for other folks that are seeing it, they're like, oh, we got to sound the alarm.
Right.
So that's what I would say we could do, just knowledge and better understanding what's happening.
Yeah. Well, you are a professor
I
at
am.
Westchester, and I know there are some people that are probably watching going, boy, I'd like to get more information. We also have some fabulous footage that you brought along that we'll be showing on the station later, too, from Antarctica. But is there an email address
Absolutely.
that they could reach you if they had questions and wanted resources and more information? What would that be?
Love to talk more, and even about the weather. Real simple, my name's Drew Anderson. It's D. Anderson at WCUPA.edu.
And it is S-O-N.
It is, I'm an S-O-N, like the pretzel. Now, if you can't remember it, no big deal. You just Google Meteorologist Drew Anderson. It'll take you to my website. We'll have a link right there to my email.
Thank you so much for taking time today and
Thank
giving
you.
us more insight into Antarctica and what's really going on with the weather. I think we're going to have to do another show and do some Weather 101.
Well, I appreciate that, and I
we'll have to do
appreciate you
that
letting
too.
me take everyone here to Antarctica with that story.
We're glad you did. Thank you so much. We'd like to say thank you for joining us today, too. I'm Diane Dayton with Behind the Lines, reminding you to look behind the lines. You might be surprised what you find.